She hadn't spoken a single word in her life. A young girl trapped in silence, her father, a millionaire, believed money could fix everything. But one afternoon in a quiet park, something happened that no doctor, no therapy, no wealth could ever achieve. A stranger stepped forward, and in that moment, the impossible became real. Yet what should have been a miracle revealed something far darker about the world we live in. How could a simple act of kindness uncover a painful truth about racism? For most of his life, Richard lived in a world where problems could be solved with wealth. A successful businessman, he provided his daughter with everything: private schools, the best doctors, endless therapies. Yet none of it could unlock the silence she carried. Born mute, she grew up in a house filled with love, but shadowed by her father's frustration. Richard wasn't angry at her, he was angry at himself. With all his resources, all his power, he still couldn't give her a voice. The park became their quiet refuge. Every weekend, they walked the same winding paths, her small hand clutching his as they watched families play, children laugh, and the world move on without noticing them. To others, Richard was the man with the expensive suit and polished car. To his daughter, he was simply Dad, the one who never stopped trying. But beneath the calm surface, Richard carried an unshakable fear. What if she never spoke? What if her silence was permanent, a wall no one could ever break? He clung to hope, yet even hope was beginning to slip. What Richard didn't know that day in the park was that someone unexpected, someone society often overlooked, was about to step into their lives. And with him, everything Richard believed about voice, power, and justice would be challenged forever. That afternoon, the park was alive with energy. Children raced across the grass, parents chatted on benches, and the warm sunlight made everything seem peaceful. Richard tried to absorb that peace, but his mind was never fully at rest. His daughter, walking quietly beside him, pointed to the ducks at the pond, her eyes lighting up. She never needed words to express her joy, but Richard still longed for her to speak, even just once. As they settled near a bench, Richard noticed a man nearby. He was tall, dressed in worn clothes, and his skin was dark, a sharp contrast to the polished world Richard inhabited. The man knelt to tie his shoes, then glanced at Richard and his daughter. There was no malice in his eyes, just a passing kindness. Yet Richard felt the shift around him before he even understood it. A group of park-goers, well-dressed like him, began whispering. Their glances weren't at Richard, but at the stranger. The kind of looks Richard had seen before. Suspicion, judgment, fear without cause. It was subtle, but heavy. A mother pulled her child closer. A man muttered something under his breath. The stranger ignored it, but Richard felt a knot form in his chest. His daughter tugged his sleeve and, without hesitation, walked toward the man. Richard's heart skipped. He wanted to stop her, to pull her back, not out of danger, but out of fear of what others might think. Eyes followed her, breaths held. What could a child possibly see in a man so many were so quick to dismiss? The girl stood before him, silent as ever. The man crouched down, meeting her eyes gently. He didn't speak at first. He simply smiled and extended his hand, not to shake, but to hold, as if offering trust. And then something extraordinary happened. Her lips parted. A sound, faint and fragile, broke through the silence that had defined her entire life. Richard froze. His heart thundered, his breath caught, and for a moment, the entire park seemed to stop moving. But before Richard could process the miracle, the murmurs grew sharper. A voice snapped, "What's he doing with that little girl?" Another accused, "Keep your kid away from him." The tone wasn't concern. It was accusation. Racism, plain and raw, wrapped in false suspicion. Richard rose quickly, his instincts battling inside him. He wanted to protect his daughter, but protect her from what? From the man who had given her a voice, or from the crowd so eager to tear him down? The stranger stood slowly, his expression calm but weary, as though he'd lived this scene countless times. His gaze didn't waver, even as the stares turned hostile. Richard realized then, this wasn't just about his daughter finding her voice. It was about whether Richard himself would find his own. And as the tension built, one question echoed in the air. Would he stand with the truth, or let silence speak louder than justice? The park, once filled with laughter, now bristled with hostility. Voices rose louder, sharper, dripping with suspicion. Parents pulled their children close, as if the stranger's kindness were somehow dangerous. A man shouted, "Keep her away from him!" Another added, "Someone call the police!" Richard's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of every accusing eye. His daughter clung to the stranger's hand, her lips trembling, her voice fragile but real. She whispered another word, soft, broken, but undeniable. It was more than Richard had ever dreamed of hearing, yet the miracle was being buried beneath prejudice. Then the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Panic spread through the crowd. A few pulled out their phones, already recording, already shaping the narrative. A black man alone with a white child. No context, no truth, just assumptions fueled by fear. Richard's heart raced. He wanted to scream the truth, to tell them this man had done nothing but give his daughter the gift of voice. But his throat locked. Years of silence, his own kind of silence, choked him in that moment. The stranger stood tall, his face calm, but his eyes carried a pain Richard had never known. This wasn't the first time he'd been judged, and it wouldn't be the last. Yet he didn't let go of the girl's hand. He held it steady, as if protecting her even from the storm brewing around them. The sirens drew closer, the flashing lights now visible through the trees. The crowd edged back, waiting, watching. And in that split second, Richard knew the next moments would define not just his daughter's voice, but his own humanity. Would he finally speak? Or would he let silence condemn an innocent man? The flashing lights spilled across the park as officers arrived, their hands hovering near their belts. The crowd parted, eager to point fingers. And for a moment, Richard feared the worst, that this miracle of his daughter's first words would end in tragedy for the man who made it possible. But then something inside Richard broke. He stepped forward, his voice unsteady but loud enough to cut through the noise. "He didn't hurt her," Richard said. "He helped her. My daughter spoke, for the first time, because of him." Silence rippled across the park. The officers paused, their eyes shifting between Richard and the stranger. The weight of judgment hung heavy, but Richard didn't stop. He stood taller, his daughter's hand still clutched in his. "If you're looking for a danger here," he added, his voice steadier now, "look at the prejudice that brought you running. Not at this man." The tension eased, but the sting of what had happened could not be undone. The stranger nodded quietly, his dignity intact, though Richard could see the weariness in his eyes. For him, this was just another day, another reminder of how quickly kindness could be twisted into suspicion. As the crowd dispersed, Richard realized something. His daughter had found her voice, but so had he. And that voice wasn't meant to stay silent in the face of injustice. Because this story wasn't just about a girl breaking her silence, it was about a world that tries to silence people every single day. So the question lingers. How many more lives, how many more voices must be silenced before we finally listen?